My mother-in-law sat on the seventh-floor windowsill, threatening to die to force me to divorce. Poor worthless trash, get out of my daughter's life. I glanced at her, pulled from my briefcase the divorce agreement I had prepared 2 months earlier. Mother-in-law, take your time coming down, don't fall. She immediately jumped down from the windowsill and pointed at the door, telling me to get out. I signed the papers, stepped into the elevator, and sent a message to my assistant. Don't keep her. 2 hours later, my ex-wife was dismissed from the law firm. Her golden lawyer career, which she had been so proud of, was wiped out overnight. What she didn't know was those major clients in her hands were ones I had given her. Now, I simply didn't want to give them anymore. Chapter 1. Vivian sat on the seventh-floor windowsill, her legs dangling outside. The living room was full of people. Her father-in-law, Richard, her brother-in-law, Kevin, 2 aunts, 3 cousins, and a few neighbors she had hurriedly called over. Everyone was looking at me. I stood at the doorway, still holding my briefcase. Claire stood by the window, her face starkly pale. She was Taiha Law Firm's star lawyer, earning a 7-figure salary, chauffeured when she went out, accompanied in court, the kind of person who made every relative proud to be connected to her. And I, Ethan, in Vivian's mouth, had always been that poor wretch who relied on his wife. Vivian grabbed the window frame and shouted at the top of her lungs. Today you two must get a divorce. As long as that pauper stays, I won't be able to sleep a single night. Claire, if you still recognize me as your mother, then divorce him immediately. Kevin leaned against the sofa, holding his phone and recording a video. Sis, Mom's already like this. What are you hesitating for? He's just a man. Lose him and find another. My aunt chimed in as well. Claire, your mother only wants what's best for you. You're young and beautiful and have a career. Why hold on to a useless man? What has he ever done for you? In all these years of buying houses and cars for the family, did he put in a single penny? I glanced at Claire. She didn't look at me. She only kept her head down, fingers twisting the hem of her clothes. This apartment was bought before our marriage. The deed is in Claire's name. That car was bought with the first consulting fee from Hongshin Group. Its title is also in Claire's name. Vivian doesn't know these things. The Shun family doesn't know either. Claire knows, but she never said anything, and I never asked her to. On our wedding day, she held my hand and said, Ethan, I'll protect you. Later she grew busier and busier. Busy enough that when Vivian smashed my cup, she told me to put up with it. Busy enough that when Kevin took my car and hit someone, she said we shouldn't make a fuss as a family. Busy enough that when Vivian called me a good-for-nothing in front of relatives, she said the elders were being difficult on purpose. Today, Vivian sat on the windowsill. She still didn't say anything. Claire finally looked up at me. Her voice trembled. Ethan, why don't we sign an agreement first? Just steady my mother for now. Once she comes down, we'll talk. The living room fell silent. Vivian's eyes brightened. Kevin put his phone down and smiled. Brother-in-law, did you hear that? I looked at Claire. Sign the agreement first? Tears rolled down her cheeks. I have no choice. Those words were colder than Vivian sitting on the windowsill. I nodded. All right. Claire froze. Vivian paused for a moment as well. I set my briefcase on the coffee table and unzipped it. Inside was a document. It wasn't something printed on the spot. It was the divorce agreement I had a lawyer draft 2 months ago. I spread the agreement out and took out a pen. Claire read the heading, and her face changed at once. You had this ready all along? I didn't answer. I flipped to the last page and signed my name. The nib traced across the paper. The only sound left in the living room was that faint scraping. Vivian poked her head over the windowsill. You really signed? I snapped the pen cap on. Signed. I pushed the agreement in front of Claire. The house is yours. The car is yours. The savings in the household account are yours. Any debts or claims under my name have nothing to do with you. Kevin laughed first. Sis, he's got some self-awareness. Knows there's nothing for him to get. Vivian immediately pulled her leg back from the windowsill. Her voice was sharp. Should have done it earlier. What's with the sentimental act? Claire signed. Claire stared at the agreement, her hand unmoving. She looked at me. Ethan, don't be ridiculous. I watched her calmly. Weren't you the one who said sign first? Her lips moved. She didn't say anything. Vivian grew anxious. What are you standing there for? He already signed. Hurry up and sign. Richard spoke too. Claire, your mother is unwell. Don't upset her further. Claire closed her eyes and picked up the pen. Her hand trembled violently as she signed. The name Claire came out crooked and shaky. I picked up the agreement and put it into my briefcase. Vivian climbed down from the windowsill and dusted off her trousers. A moment ago, she had been desperate, but now she walked steadily. The neighbors exchanged glances and said nothing. Vivian stood in front of me. "Get out, and don't you ever bother my daughter again." I looked at her. "Annie, take it easy. Don't actually fall." Vivian's face darkened. "What do you mean by that?" I ignored her. I turned and walked toward the door. Claire hurried after me for 2 steps. I stopped. Her voice was very soft. "Where are you going tonight?" I looked back at her. "None of your business." She froze completely. Vivian immediately snapped. "What kind of attitude is that of yours?" I opened the door. The motion sensor light outside came on. I stepped out and pressed the elevator button. Vivian's triumphant voice came from behind. "Claire, don't look. It's for the best that man is gone. Tomorrow Mom will set up a blind date for you." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message popped up on the screen. It was from Harrison, chairman of Hongxin Group. "Mr. Ethan, are you still going to keep Taiha Law Firm on?" I stared at the line of text. Then I pressed reply. "No." The elevator doors closed. 2 hours later, the top-floor conference room at Taiha Law Firm still had its lights on. Claire had rushed from the Shun residence to the firm. She originally had an important video conference tonight. The merger and acquisition deal involving 3 subsidiaries under Hongxin Group, worth $1.7 billion, was her case. If it concluded smoothly, she would be formally promoted to senior partner at the end of the year. When she pushed open the conference room door, 7 people were seated inside. Managing partner Victor occupied the head seat. Facing him sat Sophia, Hongxin Group's legal director. A letter of termination of cooperation lay on the table. Claire stopped in her tracks. "Victor, Sophia, what's going on?" No one answered. Victor's face looked grim. Sophia pushed the document over. "Claire, Hongxin Group has decided to terminate all cooperation with Taiha Law Firm." Claire thought she must have misheard. "All of it?" Sophia nodded. "That includes the ongoing M&A deal, the equity dispute case, and the annual legal counsel contract." The conference room was deathly silent. Claire kept her voice low. "Sophia, is there some kind of misunderstanding? This afternoon we confirm tomorrow's materials." Sophia looked at her. "No misunderstanding. This is the board's decision." Claire immediately turned to Victor. "Victor, I can explain to Harrison. If it's an issue with the plan, I can redo it tonight." Sophia cut her off. "It's not a problem with the plan." Claire's face went a shade paler. "Then what is the problem?" Sophia didn't speak immediately. She picked up the fountain pen on the table and tapped the document lightly. "Claire, you should understand better than I do." Claire's fingers clenched. A name flashed through her mind. Ethan. But she dismissed it at once. Impossible. Ethan only did corporate consulting. He knew a few bosses, but he couldn't possibly influence Hongxin Group. Nor could he make Hongxin Group withdraw the case overnight. Victor finally spoke. "Claire, what exactly happened between you and Hongxin Group? Do you know how important this client is to the firm? 40% of our annual revenue comes from Hongxin Group." Claire's voice was dry. "I haven't offended the group." Sophia looked at her. "Then who did you offend?" Claire said nothing. The conference room door was pushed open. The HR director walked in, holding another document. Victor closed his eyes. "Claire, the partnership committee at the firm just held an emergency meeting. From now on, you are suspended from all client work. All cases in your hands must be handed over. Your employment relationship will also be terminated." Claire shot up, her eyes wide. "Terminate? Victor, are you going to fire me just because Hongxin Group withdrew their case?" Victor's face went darker. "It's not me firing you. The partners all decided unanimously. Hongxin Group demanded that no future business of Taiha Law be handled by you. The other clients are watching too. We can't afford it." Claire stood where she was, as if someone had drained the strength from her. Since she entered the profession, she had fought her way to where she was today. She had endured countless all-nighters and won countless hard battles. She had thought her abilities were what had gotten her here. But now a single letter had dragged her down from that height. Sophia put the documents away. "Claire, please finish the handover as soon as possible. Hongxin Group's new counsel team will take over at 9 tomorrow morning." Claire stared at her. "Who is the new legal team?" Sophia glanced at her. "Su Consulting Group's Legal Coordination Center." A thunderclap went off in Claire's mind. Su Consulting Group. She knew Ethan had started a consulting firm. She had never asked what it was called, because Vivian had said it was just a small company. She accepted that. Her voice trembled. "Who is the head of Su Consulting Group?" Sophia did not avert her eyes. Ethan, everyone in the conference room, turned to look at Claire. Victor's face changed. Ethan, your husband. Claire opened her mouth. She wanted to say he wasn't her husband anymore. They had signed the divorce papers just 3 hours earlier. But the words got stuck in her throat and wouldn't come out. Her phone rang at that moment. It was Vivian. Claire didn't pick up. A message popped up on the screen moments later. Claire, hurry back. Your brother says someone called the bank and the mortgage approval was stopped. The next second, Kevin called too. Claire picked up. Kevin's voice was urgent and sharp. Sis, it's over. The new car I just bought. The dealership says the loan won't go through. They also said there's a problem with my previous guarantee documents. Did something happen at your law firm? Claire held the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victor stared at her. Claire, just how badly have you managed to offend Ethan? Chapter 2. When Claire returned to the Shun residence, it was already close to 11 o'clock. Vivian sat in the living room, her face wiped clean of the smugness she'd worn 3 hours earlier. Kevin paced back and forth through the house. Richard held a cigarette after another. Auntie and the cousins hadn't left yet. They had intended to stay for a celebratory meal after the divorce, but now no one dared pick up their chopsticks. The dishes on the table had already gone cold. The moment Vivian saw Claire come in, she jumped up immediately. Claire, what's going on? Why did your younger brother's car loan stop? The bank also says our family's credit records need to be re-examined. Aren't you a top lawyer? Call them right now. Claire stood in the doorway, still in her shoes. She looked at every face in the living room. 3 hours ago, these people had forced her to sign. Now, they were shoving all the problems back onto her. Kevin rushed over. Sis, did you piss off a client? I just checked. Tile Law Firm is in trouble. People online are saying Hongsheng Group pulled the case. Vivian's expression changed. Pulled the case? What do you mean pulled the case? Claire's voice went hoarse. The firm fired me. The living room fell silent for a second. Vivian widened her eyes. What did you say? Claire repeated, I've been fired. Kevin almost dropped his phone. Sis, don't joke. Aren't you a top lawyer? On what grounds would they fire you? Claire looked at him. Because Hongsheng Group terminated the cooperation. Because I can no longer touch any of their business. Vivian grew anxious. Then sue them. You're a lawyer. What are you afraid of? On what grounds can they just fire you like that? Claire smiled faintly. Very softly. Mom, do you know how much Tile Law Firm make from Hongsheng Group every year? With one word from Hongsheng Group, the director personally told me to hand everything over. Vivian was stunned. Richard frowned. Why did Hongsheng Group suddenly withdraw? Claire said nothing. Kevin reacted first. It couldn't be Ethan, could it? Vivian snapped immediately. Nonsense. What ability does he have? If he had that kind of power, would he have swallowed his pride and put up with our family for 3 years? No one answered. The words hung in the living room, and even Vivian felt uncertain. Claire took out her phone. She had called Ethan 27 times. Not a single call had been picked up. No messages had been replied to either. She opened the chat. The last message was one she had sent 3 days ago. Don't wait up for me tonight. I have a client dinner. Ethan had replied with one word. Okay. Earlier, she had told Ethan to deal with the car accident with Kevin. Ethan had replied with a single character. Okay. Earlier still, Vivian had told him not to sit at the table for dinner. Ethan had not answered. Claire suddenly realized that over the past year, Ethan had been speaking less and less. So little that she mistook it for maturity. So little that she forgot a person's silence does not mean they have no temper. Vivian leaned in. Call him. Tell him to come back right away. Has he been spouting nonsense out there? Claire, tell him that as long as he fixes this, I can let him come back for a meal. Claire looked up at her. Mom, do you think he still cares enough to come back for dinner? Vivian's face stiffened. So what else could he want? It's just a divorce, isn't it? The agreement signed. The house and car are all yours. Does he want to take it back? Claire closed her eyes. He's not trying to take it back. It's us who have to beg him. Vivian reacted as if she'd been stepped on. Beg him? Me beg him? If I sat on the windowsill today, he wouldn't even dare stop me. He's a useless man. The doorbell rang suddenly. Everyone looked toward the door. Kevin ran over and opened it. 2 men in suits were standing outside. A middle-aged man handed over a business card. Excuse me, is this Miss Claire's residence? Claire walked over. I am. The middle-aged man handed her a document. Miss Claire, I'm Daniel, the lawyer Mr. Ethan retained. This is the formal confirmation of the divorce agreement and the statement of assets. The moment Vivian heard lawyer, she rushed forward. What statement of assets? The house and car belong to my daughter. The agreement spells it out clearly. Daniel glanced at her. The agreement does indeed state that the properties and vehicles currently registered under Ms. Claire's name belong to Ms. Claire. Vivian breathed a sigh of relief. Then why are you still here? Daniel opened the file. But the down payment for this property registered under Ms. Claire's name came from Mr. Ethan's personal account before the marriage. The car was also paid for in full from Mr. Ethan's premarital personal account. Mr. Ethan has already waived any claim to division, which does not imply forgiveness of debts associated with the gifted assets. Claire's face went pale. What do you mean? Daniel's tone was steady. I mean, Mr. Ethan won't contest the house and the car, but loans, maintenance, taxes related to the house and car, and the amounts Mr. Ethan advanced to cover Mr. Kevin's vehicle accident compensation must be settled according to the attachments to the agreement. Kevin jumped up. How is that my business? Daniel looked at him. Last November, you rear-ended Mr. Ethan's car. Mr. Ethan advanced compensation of $386,000. This March, you borrowed $250,000 from Mr. Ethan, claiming it was for startup. This June, your mother, Ms. Vivian, borrowed $180,000 from Mr. Ethan, claiming it was for renovations. All of that has transfer records and chat logs. Everyone in the living room changed color. Vivian screamed. He was supporting us out of filial piety. Daniel placed the other copy on the coffee table. In the chat record, Ms. Vivian wrote borrowed. Mr. Kevin wrote, will repay next month. Mr. Ethan reserved the right of recourse. Vivian reached out to tear up the document. The assistant behind Daniel stepped forward. Ms. Vivian, tearing up the copy is pointless. The original has already been notarized. Vivian's hand froze in midair. Claire stared at those documents, her breath tightening. Ethan hadn't suddenly turned ruthless. He had been prepared for this for a long time. Daniel took out another sheet. Also, Mr. Ethan asked me to relay this to Ms. Claire. Meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau entrance at 9 tomorrow morning. If Ms. Claire does not show, Mr. Ethan will file for divorce in court according to the agreement. Vivian immediately shouted, he wouldn't dare. Daniel looked at her. Ms. Vivian, Mr. Ethan also asked me to tell you one more thing. The living room fell silent. Daniel closed the file. He said, from today on, don't call him your son-in-law anymore. You don't deserve it. Vivian's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to curse. At that moment, Claire's phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. She answered it. Victor's low voice came from the other end. Claire, check your email right now. Hongshin Group just sent a second letter. They're going to hold you accountable for leaking client information. The letter was copied to the Bar Association. The phone in Claire's hand slipped. Daniel looked at her, his voice flat. Ms. Claire, Mr. Ethan also said, this is only the first one. Claire gripped the phone. Her fingertips were cold as ice. Victor's voice continued on the line. Hongshin Group has submitted screenshots of your correspondence with a client. They believe you took the merger draft home without authorization, and there is a risk of leakage. If the Bar Association opens a case, your practicing license could be suspended. Claire's head buzzed. I didn't leak client information. Victor was silent for 2 seconds. Claire, whether I believe you doesn't matter. What Hongshin Group wants now is an attitude. The firm has already decided to cooperate with the investigation. Claire understood. Cooperate with the investigation was code for throwing her out. Her throat tightened. Victor, I've been at Tile Law Firm for 7 years. The Hongshin Group case, I pulled all-nighters for that case. Now something's gone wrong, and you won't even look into it, but you're ready to pin it on me? Victor sighed. Don't blame me. You should ask Ethan. The phone clicked off. Everyone in the living room looked at Claire. Vivian reacted first. What did he say? Something about leaking client information. Claire didn't speak. She lowered her head and opened her email. The latest email came from Hongshin Group's legal department. The subject was brief. Inquiry regarding attorney Claire of Taiha Law Firm suspected of breaching confidentiality obligations. There were 3 photos attached. The first showed the M&A materials she kept in her home study. The second picture was a screenshot of Kevin taking photos of the documents and posting them to his Moments. The third was a comment left under the Moments post. Brother Kevin, what big project is this? Kevin replied, my sister's 10-odd billion M&A deal. Those in the know will understand. Claire's vision went black. She jerked her head up and looked at Kevin. Did you go through the materials in my study? Kevin froze for a moment. I only took one photo. Who knows what that document was? Claire's voice trembled. How many times have I told you? Do not go into my study. Kevin immediately bristled. I didn't steal anything. Besides, I already deleted that post on Moments. Daniel stood to the side and said calmly, deletion doesn't affect evidence collection. Screenshot timestamps, forwarding paths, and server logs can all be recovered. Kevin's face went pale. Vivian rushed over to Claire's side. Claire, don't scare your brother. He just posted something on Moments. How serious can it be? You're a lawyer. You can definitely handle it. Claire looked at her and suddenly let out a laugh. Mom, this isn't a neighborly quarrel. This is a 1.7 billion murder case. Vivian was frightened by her tone. Richard finally crushed out his cigarette. Claire, the most important thing now is to find Ethan. Since he started this, have him stop it. Vivian immediately chimed in. Yes, call him. Tell him I was speaking out of anger today. Tell him to stop making trouble. Claire lowered her head and looked at the call log. 27 missed calls. No reply to her messages. She suddenly remembered Ethan's look from a few hours earlier when he left. Calm. No anger. No pleading. No disappointment. Like someone who had already settled the account. Claire dialed the number. This time, the phone rang for a long time. Just when everyone thought it wouldn't be answered, Ethan's voice came through the receiver. What's up? The living room fell instantly silent. Claire tightened her grip on her phone. Ethan, the Hong Chung group thing, did you do it? There was a long quiet on the other end. After 2 seconds, Ethan said, yes. Claire's eyes flushed red. She had expected at least a denial. But his admission was too straightforward. Why? Ethan's voice was flat. Because I was the one who gave you Hong Chung group's contract. Now I don't want to give it anymore. Claire's breath caught. Vivian, upon hearing this, immediately shrieked. Ethan, what do you mean? By what right are you pulling my daughter's client? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ethan said calmly, Ms. Vivian, your daughter's client? Are you sure? Vivian was momentarily at a loss for words. Claire bit her lip. Ethan, Hong Chung Group is very important to me. I know. Can you not make things irreversible first? Ethan chuckled softly. The laugh was light, yet it sent a chill through Claire. Claire, when your mother sat on the windowsill, you told me to sign first. When your brother hit someone, I dealt with the aftermath. When your mother called me a pauper in front of all the relatives, you asked me to endure it. When your family treated my things as if they were theirs by right, did you ever think about not making things irreversible? Tears fell from Claire's eyes. I had no choice then. Yes, Ethan said. You never could. So now I can't either. Vivian snatched the phone. Ethan, don't be shameless. The agreement is signed. The house and car are all given to Claire. What more do you want? Do you dare me to stir things up at your company? Ethan's voice turned cold. You can come. But I also have the video of you sitting on the windowsill. Vivian froze. Ethan continued. You threatened someone with suicide to force a divorce. Your whole family surrounded me to get me to sign the agreement. Kevin recorded the whole thing. If necessary, I'll hand the full materials over to the police and the courts. The color drained slowly from Vivian's face. Kevin fumbled for his phone. I deleted it. Daniel glanced at him. Clouds sink. Kevin's hand froze. Claire took her phone back. Her voice was hoarse, not like herself. Ethan, the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. Do you really have to go? Ethan was silent for a moment. I'll go. Is it possible to talk it over again? No. The words dropped like a door being slammed shut. Claire closed her eyes. What about Hong Chung Group? Ethan said, deal with it according to the law. Claire, you're a lawyer. You should understand better than anyone. The signatures you've made, the things you've done, all have consequences. The call ended. The living room fell into a deathly silence. Vivian suddenly felt her legs go weak and sank onto the sofa. Kevin kept muttering, impossible. How could he have such power? Richard's face was ashen. Before we go to the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow, we have to make him change his mind. Vivian grabbed at a lifeline. Right. We'll go together tomorrow. I just don't believe you would really dare to make a scene like this. Claire opened her eyes. She looked at the window glass streaked with rain and suddenly remembered the first time Ethan came to the Shun house, standing at the door with gifts, smiling as he called her mom. Back then, Vivian hadn't even let him enter. At the time, she only said, Ethan, don't take it to heart. Now she understood. He hadn't been indifferent. He had simply logged every single slight into today's ledger. Just then, Claire's phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number popped up. Lawyer Claire, I'm with the Bar Association's investigation team. Please come to the association for questioning tomorrow at 10 a.m. Claire stared at the time, her face completely drained of color. At 9 tomorrow morning, she had to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to file for divorce. At 10 tomorrow morning, she had to go to the Bar Association for an inquiry. And another news alert popped up at the bottom of the screen. The Hongsheng Group's $1.7 billion acquisition case has temporarily changed its legal team. The new lead suspected to be the mysterious business consultant Ethan. Chapter 03. At 8:30 the next morning, there were already quite a few people lined up at the Civil Affairs Bureau entrance. Some arrived hand in hand to collect marriage certificates. Some came with red-rimmed eyes to file for divorce. Claire stood at the foot of the steps, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. She hadn't slept all night. Vivian was here too. She had a mask and sunglasses on. She said it was to avoid being seen by the neighbors, but in truth she was afraid Ethan would actually use the video to make trouble. Kevin followed as well. His face looked bad. His phone hadn't stopped all night. The bank, the dealership, collection calls, friends who had once eaten and drunk with him, all of them, as if they'd caught wind of something, had changed their expressions. Richard stood at the very edge, his face taut and silent. 8:50, a black executive car pulled up at the curb. The car door opened, and Ethan stepped out. He wore a black coat and carried no umbrella. The rain had stopped, but puddles still rimed the ground. The moment Claire saw him, something stabbed at her chest. He was still the same Ethan. Only today, there was no warmth in the way he looked at her. Vivian was the first to rush over. "Ethan, you finally came. Yesterday was all a misunderstanding." Ethan didn't stop walking. Vivian reached out to stop him. Wilson stepped forward beside her, placing himself in front of her. "Ms. Vivian, please keep your distance." Vivian was stopped by a driver and immediately blew up. "What do you think you are? I'm talking to my son-in-law. Who asked you to butt in?" Ethan halted. He looked at Vivian. "First of all, I'm not your son-in-law. Second, he's my driver, and he's also the administrative head of Sue Consulting Group. Third, if you insult my employee again, I'll call the police." Vivian's face went pale and then flushed. Kevin couldn't help but speak. "Brother-in-law, that's unnecessary. We're all family." Ethan turned his head to look at him. "The $816,000 you owe me. Pay it back by 5 this afternoon." Kevin jumped up instantly. "What, 816,000? You're extorting me." Ethan said calmly, "$386,000 for the accident compensation, $250,000 for startup loans, and the $6,000 you charged on my credit card." Kevin's face changed drastically. "Wasn't that car the one you gave me to use? I bought you breakfast before. Does that count as authorizing you to overdraft?" Kevin couldn't speak. Vivian hurriedly steered the topic back. "Ethan, we'll talk about the money later. First pull out from Hongsheng Group. Claire can't lose her job." Ethan looked at her. "She's already lost." Vivian's lips trembled. "Then let her go back. Tell that Harrison. Aren't you so capable?" Ethan sounded as if he'd heard something ridiculous. "Ms. Vivian, what did you call me yesterday?" Vivian's face froze instantly. Ethan answered for her. "Poor bastard. Loser. Not worthy of her daughter. Now you want me, this poor bastard, to help your daughter get back into the firm?" Vivian gritted her teeth. "I was flustered yesterday. You're a grown man. How can you still hold a grudge?" Ethan nodded. "I don't hold grudges. I just keep accounts." Claire finally spoke. "Mom, stop." She walked up to Ethan. They were half a step apart. In the past, if she merely frowned, Ethan would ask if she was tired. But today, he just looked at her calmly. Claire's voice was soft. "Ethan, I want to speak with you alone." Vivian immediately objected. "What's there to talk about alone? Don't let him intimidate you. He just wants to manipulate you." Ethan looked at Claire. "You have only 5 minutes." Claire nodded. The two of them walked to the tree beside the Civil Affairs Bureau. Wilson stood not far away. Vivian wanted to follow, but Richard grabbed her by the arm. "Claire Kanja, Ethan." She had prepared so many words. Apologies, explanations, pleas, entreaties. But when she actually stood in front of him, she couldn't utter a single complete sentence. In the end, she only said, "I'm sorry." Ethan didn't respond. Claire's eyes reddened. "Over these 3 years, I really did make a lot of mistakes. I thought that if you didn't say anything, you could tolerate it. I thought that if I was busy with my career, I could always make it up to you later. I thought you would always be there." Ethan looked into the distance. "You're a lawyer. The one thing you mustn't trust is the word think." Claire's throat tightened. "I know it's too late to say this now, but can we not pursue the Hongsheng Group matter for the time being? The Bar Association has summoned me for questioning at 10. If my practice license gets suspended, everything I've built these past years will be over." Ethan finally looked at her. Did you know Kevin photographed the documents and posted them to his moments? Claire nodded. I only found out last night. Do you know that taking client files home is a violation in itself? Claire's face went pale. She wanted to retort, but couldn't find words. Ethan continued. Every project I gave you had confidentiality clauses in the contract. You're the lead attorney. You know that better than anyone. Claire lowered her head. I'm willing to take responsibility. But could you not push me into a dead end? Ethan was silent for a moment. Claire, when your mother sat on the windowsill, did you ever think that she was also the one who pushed me into a dead end? Tears fell from Claire's eyes. But Ethan's voice was steady. What I lost was a marriage. What you lost was a career. That's fair. Claire looked up at him. Between us, is it really only fairness left? Ethan didn't answer. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Harrison. Ethan answered. Mr. Harrison. The voice on the other end was not quiet. Claire heard it faintly. Mr. Ethan, Victor from Taiha Law Firm, just came to see me. He said he's willing to remove Claire from the case in exchange for Hongchang Group retaining part of the cooperation. Claire's expression changed sharply. Ethan glanced at her. What did you say? Harrison sneered. Taiha Law Firm has plenty of problems too. If Mr. Ethan agrees, I'll have the auditors start today. Ethan said, do it by the contract. Hold those responsible accountable. Don't go easy. Claire stood stock still, as if the cold wind had seeped right through her. Ethan hung up the phone. She asked hoarsely, you're going after Taiha Law Firm too? Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket. I'm not the one going after them. They took dividends they shouldn't have, and now want to shove all the blame onto you. Haven't you always said you stood on your own merit? Now's a good time to see how many people will still defend you once they no longer need the clients I gave you. Claire couldn't get a single word out. The Civil Affairs Bureau's hall began calling numbers. Wilson walked over. Mr. Ethan, it's time. Ethan turned around. Claire instinctively grabbed his sleeve. This was the first time in 3 years she had tried to keep him. Ethan glanced down. Let go. Claire's fingers trembled. In the end, she released him. The two of them walked into the hall. Vivian and Kevin tried to follow, but were stopped outside by the staff. Half an hour later, the red divorce certificate received its stamp. Claire looked at that thin document and suddenly felt as if her whole world had gone hollow. Ethan took the certificate and did not linger. He stood up and left. Claire chased him to the door. Ethan. Ethan stopped, but did not turn around. Claire's voice trembled. If I change from now on, is there still a chance? Ethan was silent for 2 seconds. No. He finished speaking and walked down the steps. The black business van slowly drove away. Vivian rushed up and grabbed Claire's arm. Well, did he agree? Claire looked at the divorce certificate in her hand. We're divorced. Vivian froze. Before she could speak again, a white sedan pulled up outside the Civil Affairs Bureau. 2 people in uniforms got out and walked straight toward Claire. Ms. Claire, we are staff from the Bar Association's Discipline Committee. Please come with us now. Vivian's face went ashen. Kevin turned to slip away, but one of the staff members looked at him. Mr. Kevin, you also need to cooperate and explain the circumstances of the material's filming and dissemination. Kevin's legs went weak. Chapter 04. The Bar Association's Disciplinary Committee inquiry room was small. White light poured down. Claire sat at the table, her back held very straight. She was used to controlling the pace in a conference room, used to overwhelming the other side with evidence, statutes, and logic. But now she sat in the hot seat. The person across the table opened the documents. Lawyer Claire, please confirm whether you were responsible for safeguarding this draft of the merger and acquisition case. Claire's voice was rough. Yes. Did you take the hard copies out of the firm and place them in your home study? Yes. Were you granted written authorization by the client? Claire was silent. The other person looked up at her. Please answer. No. The pen tip scraped across the paper. The sound was terrifyingly faint. Another staff member pushed the screenshot in front of her. Does the document in this photo involve the core transaction structure of Hongchang Group's merger and acquisition project? Claire glanced at it. Although only a corner was visible in the photo, it was enough to make out the project number and the abbreviated name of the target company. She closed her eyes. Yes, it does. What is your relationship with the poster, Kevin? Little brother. Was he a participant in the case? No. Did he sign a non-disclosure agreement? No. Each question was like a nail. The more Claire answered, the clearer it became that she could not defend herself. She truly hadn't intentionally leaked anything. But before the law and professional disciplinary rules, negligence is not a carte blanche for innocence. The inquiry lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the other party closed the file. Until the investigation concludes, we recommend you suspend taking on related matters. When Claire stepped out of the interrogation room, Vivian immediately rushed up to her. How did it go? Claire didn't answer. She saw Kevin sitting on the hallway bench, his face ashen, muttering, "They won't arrest me, will they?" Vivian said irritably, "Don't scare yourself. What harm can a post on Moments do?" Claire stopped in her tracks. "Mom." Vivian looked at her. Claire's voice was very soft. "You still think it's nothing?" Vivian opened her mouth. "I don't understand. You're the lawyer. You know this. You handle it." Claire looked at her. "I was fired. My practicing license might be suspended. Hongqin Group wants to hold me accountable. Taiha Law Firm is shifting the blame onto me. Ethan wants you to pay him back. What else do you want me to handle?" Vivian's face turned ashen from her words. After a moment, she suddenly began to cry. "What else could I do? Aren't I doing this for your own good? During those 3 years you were married to Ethan, what did people say about you? They said someone as outstanding as you had married a useless man. As your mother, hearing that hurt me." Claire thought it was absurd. "So you're forcing me to get a divorce? You sat on the windowsill and threatened me." Vivian wiped her tears. "If I didn't push you, would you ever make up your mind? How was I supposed to know there were so many things going on behind him?" Claire suddenly didn't want to speak anymore, because she realized Vivian wasn't regretting hurting Ethan. She regretted that Ethan was useful. Richard walked over from the stairwell. "Stop arguing. What matters now is finding someone to plead our case. Claire, didn't you used to know quite a few clients? Get them to help contact Hongqin Group." Claire shook her head. "No one would risk offending Hongqin Group for me." Richard frowned. "What about Ethan? You've been his wife for 3 years. There must be some feeling there." Vivian immediately said, "Right. You could kneel to him. If a woman shows a little softness, won't he actually feel for you?" Claire looked up at her. "When you told him to get lost yesterday, did you ever think whether he might have felt any pain?" Vivian was so blocked, she couldn't get a word out. At that moment, Claire's phone rang. It was a client she had been on good terms with before. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Mr. Wong." The voice on the other end was polite, but without warmth. "Lawyer Claire, I've heard you've had some issues lately. We're going to put that equity incentive project on hold. We won't trouble you with it for now." Claire held her phone. "Mr. Wong, the project has already advanced to the 3rd stage. I know, but our board is being cautious. We'll be switching teams moving forward." The phone clicked off. Immediately after, another call came in. "Lawyer Claire, sorry, we need to pause the contract review for now." The third call. "Claire, handle your own matters first. We can talk about cooperating later." The fourth call, the fifth call. As if on cue, those who had once shouted "big lawyer" at her across banquet tables crossed her name off their contact lists one by one. Claire stood at the Bar Association's entrance. Sunlight fell on her, but she shivered with cold. That afternoon, conference room number 2 of Taiha Law Firm. The audit team had already taken their places. Sophia sat opposite her, a stack of files laid out in front of her. "Attorney Claire, we need you to provide all handover records for the project working papers, client authorization records, and external approval records." Claire's voice was husky. Some of the earlier projects, back then the processes weren't complete. Sophia looked at her. "Not complete? Or not there at all?" The conference room fell silent. Victor frowned immediately. "Sophia, Taiha Law Firm has always had internal management procedures." Sophia looked at him coldly. "Then please, Victor, produce the approval records." Victor was at a loss for words. Another auditor from Hongqin Group opened his notebook. "At present, we found that the 3 early working papers for major Hongqin Group projects were all forwarded through Attorney Claire's personal email. Taiha Law Firm servers show no complete trace. Was this authorized by the firm, or was it a personal action?" Victor's expression changed. He looked at Claire. "Claire, how could you send client files through your personal email?" Claire froze. That had been 4 years ago. At the time, Taiha's system had crashed and the project deadline was looming. She had asked Victor. He had only said then, "Just get the work done." Now, he looked as if he were hearing it for the first time. Claire watched him. "Victor, you were the one who told me to handle it first." Victor's face went completely dark. "Do you have any proof?" Claire opened her mouth. "No." That remark was made in the break room. "No emails. No recordings. No written confirmation of any kind." The conference room door opened. The administrative manager walked in, speaking softly. "Victor, people from Sue Consulting Group are here." Claire's heart lurched. The next second, Ethan walked in. 2 project managers followed behind him. and Wilson. Everyone in the conference room stood up. Even Victor forced a smile. Mr. Ethan. Claire watched the scene, feeling as if something had slammed down on her chest. During 3 years at the Shun family, the names Ethan was called most were Pauper and Loser. And here, everyone called him Mr. Ethan. Ethan didn't look at her. He sat down beside Sophia, opened the file. Continue. The auditor reported immediately. Mr. Ethan, Taiha Law Firm, is currently unable to provide 3 external approval forms. 2 records of document destruction are missing. Additionally, backup files for 4 cases are still stored on Attorney Claire's personal devices. Claire was startled. Personal devices? The auditor looked at her. Your personal laptop logged into Taiha Law Firm's internal system multiple times and downloaded project files for Hongshin Group. Claire immediately explained. That computer is what I used to work overtime at home. The files weren't leaked. Ethan finally looked up at her. Claire, do you think that if no consequences seem to have occurred, it's not a problem? Claire's face went pale. She couldn't answer, because she had seen with her own eyes just yesterday that the consequences had already happened. Kevin's single social media photo was enough to tear apart all her luck. Victor hurriedly said, Mr. Ethan, Claire did make mistakes, but Taiha Law Firm is willing to fully cooperate with rectification. Hongshin Group has worked with Taiha for years. You don't need to dismiss everything because of one person's problem. Claire snapped a look at him. One person's problem. That phrase was colder than a dismissal email. Ethan closed the file. Victor, you should know why Hongshin Group chose Taiha Law Firm back then. Victor's expression stiffened. Ethan continued, I'm giving you this chance because Claire is here, not because Taiha Law Firm is irreplaceable. The conference room was terrifyingly silent. A prickling numbness spread slowly through Claire's fingertips. Victor's smile faltered. Mr. Ethan, we truly owe you for arranging that cooperation back then. But Taiha Law Firm has also contributed a lot over the years. Ethan said coolly, contribution doesn't equal permission to break the rules. Nor does it mean when something goes wrong, you can just push someone out. Sophia handed over a supplemental letter. Hongshin Group has decided to suspend all new cooperation with Taiha Law Firm. Existing projects will enter audit and liquidation. For parts involving breach of contract liability, the legal department will notify separately. Victor's face drained completely. This didn't just remove Claire. It effectively flipped half the table at Taiha Law Firm. Claire looked at Ethan. Suddenly, she couldn't tell whether he was punishing her or punishing everyone who had once ridden her coattails. Ethan stood. Lawyer Claire. That form of address made Claire's heart lurch. He had rarely called her that before. Your personal devices. Turn them over to the Bar Association and Hongshin Group for evidence extraction by this afternoon. If you refuse, we will petition for preservation measures. Claire spoke with difficulty. I won't refuse. Ethan nodded and turned to leave. At the door, Victor suddenly spoke. Mr. Ethan, always leave a way out. Ethan stopped. He turned back to look at Victor. Victor, I left one before. You didn't cherish it. He spoke and walked out of the conference room. Claire sat where she was, motionless for a long time. Victor suddenly lashed out at her. Claire, look at the trouble you've caused. Claire looked up at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only a weary clarity. Victor, you just said it was my problem alone. May I ask one thing? When Hongshin Group's first contract came to Taiha Law Firm, why didn't you say it was Ethan's connection? Victor's face darkened. Does it matter now? Claire smiled. It does. At least I know who lifted me up once and who pushed me down. She stood up. I'll clear out my things. I'll take responsibility for what I must. But don't even think about pinning all of Taiha Law Firm's responsibility on me. Victor slammed the table. Claire, do you still want to stay in this industry? Claire looked at him. Haven't you already pushed me out? She turned and left the conference room. In the corridor, Emily, the assistant who had once followed her, stood to one side with red-rimmed eyes. Attorney Claire. Claire stopped. Emily handed her a paper bag. These are your personal items from your office. Admin said you can't go in alone. Claire took the paper bag. Inside were only a few books, a cup, and an old photograph. The photo was taken the day she became a partner candidate. She stood before the Taiha Law Firm backdrop, smiling with bright confidence. In the corner of the photo, Ethan stood off to the side. He hadn't taken a seat. He was just quietly watching her. At that celebration banquet, Vivian even said it in front of the relatives. Our Claire made it on her own, not like some people who only ride on others' coattails. Ethan was there too. He just bowed his head and took a sip of tea. Claire looked at the photo, and tears suddenly fell. At that moment, Emily lowered her voice. Lawyer Claire, there's one more thing. Victor had someone organize the materials just now. He's preparing to submit a new statement to the Bar Association. Claire looked up. What explanation? Emily's face went pale. He said that back then you alone were responsible for managing all the project files for Hongsheng Group. If anything went wrong, the firm wouldn't have known. Claire clenched the paper bag. She had just stepped out of the Taihao law firm building when her phone rang. It's Vivian. Claire, come back quickly. People from the court went to the house. They say the property has been placed under preservation. Claire closed her eyes. She was about to speak when a commotion rose from the direction of the Bar Association hall. She turned her head to look. Ethan was coming out from the inquiry room. Sophia walked beside him, along with two men in suits. Vivian, who had somehow arrived at the Bar Association as well, saw Ethan and her eyes went red. With a thud, she dropped to her knees before him. Ethan, Annie was wrong. Please let Claire go. The entire Bar Association hall fell silent in an instant. Ethan looked down at her. Ms. Vivian, get up. Vivian clutched at his trouser leg. You can't be this cruel. The house is Claire's only lifeline. You can't even touch the house. Ethan took a step back. Wilson immediately stepped in front of him. I've already given her the house as per the agreement. I applied for asset preservation to secure the money you owe me. I'm not seizing her house. Vivian's sobs faltered. Ethan spoke calmly. You sat on the windowsill yesterday. Today you're kneeling in the hall. Ms. Vivian, your way of solving problems has always been to force others. Vivian was stung by the words and looked up. I'm only doing this for my daughter. Ethan looked at Claire. Claire, what do you think? Claire's throat felt as if something were blocking it. She couldn't bring herself to say yes. Nor could she say no. Because at this moment, she finally understood that what Vivian called doing something for her had always been built on sacrificing others. In the past, it was Ethan who was sacrificed. Now it was her dignity and reputation. Sophia glanced at the time. Mr. Ethan, the inquiry is waiting over there. Ethan nodded and walked straight inside. Vivian tried to rush forward, but Wilson stopped her. Ms. Vivian, if you interfere again, we'll have to call security. Vivian sat on the ground, crying even louder. My former son-in-law is trying to kill his mother-in-law. Just look at him, all of you. Ethan stopped in his tracks. He didn't look back. He simply spoke. Wilson. Wilson answered immediately. Mr. Ethan. Ethan said, record what she just said. Along with yesterday's windowsill video, hand everything over to Lawyer Daniel. Vivian's sobbing stopped abruptly. Kevin quickly pulled her away. Mom, don't scream. He really will sue. Vivian's lips trembled as she finally got up from the ground. Claire stood to the side, suddenly feeling unbearably exhausted. Just then, Adrian stepped out from inside and walked up to Claire. Ms. Claire. Claire looked up. Adrian's tone was businesslike. Mr. Ethan asked me to inform you. Tonight at 9, Sue Consulting Group Headquarters. He paused. He has 10 minutes to see you. Chapter 05. 8:55 p.m., Claire stood at the reception desk of Sue Consulting. The lights were bright. Behind the glass wall was a whole floor of open office space. Someone was on a video call in a conference room. Someone else hurried past clutching files. The walls bore no extravagant decorations, only a single, clean line of the company name. Sue Consulting. She had passed by here many times before. She knew the rent for this building was expensive and that the tenants were investment banks, funds, and large consulting firms. But she had never associated this place with Ethan, because she had never truly understood Ethan's work. After the receptionist verified her identity, she was led into a meeting room. A cup of warm water sat on the tea table. Claire stared at the glass of water and suddenly remembered how, whenever she came back from court, Ethan would pour her a cup of warm water. She would always take it without thinking, sometimes not even saying thank you. At 9 o'clock, the door was pushed open. Ethan walked in. He had just finished a meeting. His sleeves were slightly rolled up, and his expression showed some fatigue. But this fatigue was completely different from the weariness he bore at the Shen residence. There, his tiredness was silence and suppression. Here, his fatigue carried a sense of command, like a man who had finally reclaimed his place. Claire stood up. Ethan. Ethan sat down opposite her. 10 minutes. Claire's fingers tightened slightly. The words she had prepared unraveled the moment she saw him. A few seconds passed before she spoke. Thank you for what you did about Victor. Ethan looked at her. It wasn't to help you. Taiha law firm fabricating documents would affect Hongsheng Group's audit results. I simply put things back where they belong. Claire nodded. I know. The room fell quiet. She took a deep breath. I only found out today that the very first contract with Hongxin Group was the one you gave to Taiha Law Firm. Actually, it wasn't just Hongxin Group, was it? Ethan did not deny it. You have several key clients in your hands. It was I who introduced them to you. Claire's eyes reddened. Why did you never say anything? Ethan said lightly. Do you believe me? Claire froze. She wanted to say she would, but the words wouldn't come out, because she knew she wouldn't. Over the years, she had been hoisted higher and higher by the firm's praise, clients' respect, and relatives' compliments. She had grown used to being the star lawyer, used to Ethan being the quiet husband behind her. If Ethan told her that those resources came from him, she would probably think he was taking credit. She might even get impatient, saying she reached where she is today by her own ability. Claire's tears fell. I am sorry. I've owed you those words for too long. Ethan's expression didn't change. I received your apology. Nothing else needs to be said. A sharp ache pricked Claire's chest. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know we're divorced. I know a lot of things can't be undone. I just wanted to tell you in person that I was really wrong before. Ethan looked at her. Claire, your biggest problem wasn't being wrong. It was that every time you knew what was right, you chose the easiest path. Claire's face drained a color bit by bit. It was sharper than any insult, because every word he spoke was true. Ethan continued. Your mother humiliated me, and you knew she was wrong. Your brother caused trouble, and you knew he should be held accountable. Taiha's procedures were violated, and you knew they were non-compliant. Yet you let everything slide, because that was the easiest way. Claire lowered her head. I know it's too late to say this now, but about the Hongchang Group matter, could we not pursue it for the time being? The Bar Association is calling me in at 10 for questioning. If my license gets suspended, everything I've built these past years will be ruined. Ethan was silent for a moment. Claire, when your mother sat on the windowsill, did you ever think that she was also the one who pushed me to the brink? Tears fell from Claire's eyes, but Ethan's voice was steady. I lost a marriage. You lost a career. That's fair. Claire looked up at him. Is there really nothing left between us but fairness? Ethan didn't answer. He glanced at the time. You have 3 minutes left. Claire took a deep breath. What else can I do? Ethan looked at her. Take responsibility. Cooperate with the investigation. Compensate where you must. Sever ties with the shunned family. Stop treating crying and regret as solutions. Claire bit her lip. And if I do all that? Ethan glanced at her. That's your life. It has nothing to do with me. The words were light, yet they sank Claire's heart completely. She finally understood that Ethan hadn't met her today to give her hope. He had come to give her one last moment of clarity. The clock on the wall jumped to 10 past 9. Ethan stood up. Time's up. Claire stood as well. She looked at him and finally asked the question she had been afraid to ask. Ethan, in these 3 years, was there any moment when you truly thought about continuing to live with me? Ethan's hand paused on the doorknob. He was silent for a long time, so long that Claire nearly dared not breathe. Finally, he said, there were. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes instantly. Ethan didn't look back. But you've drained it all. The door opened. The hallway lights spilled in. After Ethan left, Claire stood alone in the reception room, motionless for a long time. She thought she had already become numb with pain. But the real pain, it turned out, was hearing with her own ears a person who once loved her calmly say that everything had been used up. When she walked out of Sue Consulting Group, it was already nearly 10:30. The phone had just powered on when dozens of missed calls flooded in. Most of them were from Vivian. There was also a text message. Claire, your brother's in trouble. He blamed everything on you at the police station. Claire stared at the message, a tightness seizing her chest. Her phone buzzed again. It was Daniel. Miss Claire, Mr. Ethan asked me to convey something to you. Claire answered the phone. Daniel's voice was very calm. When we were looking into how Kevin's information was being circulated, we found that he used your private seal to issue a legal opinion letter for a small company. That company is connected to Vincent. Claire's breath caught. What do you mean? Daniel saw. The letter wasn't headed with Taiha Law Firm, but your name was used as the signature. If the letter involves a false endorsement, you'll be implicated. Claire's voice was hoarse. I had no idea about this. Daniel saw. Mr. Ethan suggests you immediately check the usage of all your seals, signed documents, and electronic certificates. If you find anything unusual, explain it to the Bar Association and the police as soon as possible. The call ended. Claire hailed a car and rushed back to the Shun residence. She stormed into the study and yanked open the drawer. The ink pad box was still there. She opened it. It was empty. Claire's breath stopped instantly. She emptied the entire drawer. Papers, pens, old business cards spilled everywhere. The private seal engraved with her name was gone. She immediately dialed Kevin's number. Power off. Called Vivian. No answer. Called Richard. Still no answer. Just as she was about to call the police, her phone suddenly received a message from an unknown number. The text message contained a photo. In the photo, the personal seal engraved with Claire's name sat beside a loan contract. The loan amount was $3 million. At the signature line, her personal seal was stamped conspicuously. The text message contained only one sentence. Lawyer Claire, your brother's debt needs to be paid by someone. Chapter 06. Claire stared at the photograph, her fingers growing numb bit by bit. The borrower on the contract was not Kevin. It was her. The stated purpose of the loan read, advancing corporate legal service funds for cash flow. The guarantor line was blank, but it bore her personal stamp in the signature area, beside a crooked, hesitant signature. Claire could tell at a glance that the signature was forged, but the personal seal was real. Another text message arrived. Return the $3 million principal and the $420,000 in interest by 6 p.m. today, or we'll take this to the Bar Association, your home, and your ex-husband's company. Claire took a deep breath and immediately screenshot and saved it. She didn't call the unknown number back. She first rang the police station's duty line, reported that her personal seal had likely been misused, and requested to file an additional police report. The dispatcher told her to bring the relevant materials and come immediately. Claire packed the laptop, the hard drive, and the folder, then added the ink pad and the empty seal box from the drawer into the bag. As she left, she paused at the crooked family portrait in the living room. A few seconds later, she stepped over, took the frame down from the wall. Behind the glass, Ethan stood at the very edge, half his shoulder almost cropped out by the frame. Claire slid the photo out, folded over Ethan's half, and carefully put it into her bag. She didn't know why she was doing this. Perhaps, in that moment, she simply no longer wanted Ethan and the Shun family to appear in the same photograph. When she arrived at the police station, Vivian and Richard were still waiting in the corridor. Vivian's eyes were badly swollen. The moment she saw her, she rushed over. Claire, you're finally here. Please do something. They say Kevin might be detained. Claire stopped in her tracks. Did you take my private seal? Vivian's expression visibly stiffened. Richard frowned. Why are you asking that now? Claire looked at them. Someone used my private seal to sign a loan contract for $3 million. Vivian's lips trembled. $3 million what? Claire didn't look at her. She stared only at Richard. Dad, did you know? Richard avoided her gaze. I didn't know. The answer came too quickly. So quick it sounded like it had been prepared long ago. The last sliver of hope in Claire's heart crumbled. She stepped past them and walked toward the inquiry room. Vivian grabbed her. Claire, don't go in there and say anything reckless. Kevin's already caused enough trouble. Claire turned to look at her. So you really did take that seal? Vivian's face went deathly pale. I didn't. I just saw it in the study and was afraid you'd lose it. So I put it away for you. Claire laughed with anger. Put away where? Vivian hesitated and stammered. Later, Kevin said his friend's company needed a certification. He said it was just a formality. How would I know about those things? A ringing noise suddenly filled Claire's ears. She looked at her mother and found herself unable to say a single word. Vivian was still explaining. Mom really didn't know there would be a loan agreement. Kevin said he was starting a business. Investors wanted to see legal documents before they put money in. I thought, you're his older sister. Shouldn't you give your brother a hand? Claire's voice trembled. So you took my private seal and guaranteed for Kevin. Vivian grew frantic. It's not collateral. Kevin said it will be fine. He said Vincent was just preparing the paperwork first. The money will come back soon. Claire closed her eyes. She had always thought Vivian stupid, but at least she wouldn't harm her. Now she realized that many harms didn't require malice. With enough selfishness, enough ignorance, and enough entitlement, someone could be pushed off the edge. The police came out from inside. Claire's here. Claire looked up. That's me. She handed over the file folder. I need to file an additional police report. My personal seal appears to have been misused, involving forged signatures, loan contracts, and possible illegal guarantees. Vivian froze at those words, panic flashing across her face. Claire, you can't go to the police. If you report this, Kevin is finished. Claire did not look back. If he took my private seal, He should have expected this day. Vivian suddenly burst into tears. How can you be so heartless? Your brother's already inside, and you still want to add charges on him. Claire turned around and looked at her. Mom, yesterday you asked me to cover for his client leaking secrets. Today you want me to acknowledge a $3 million loan. What about tomorrow? Will someone ask you to hand over my practice license, my house, my life to him, and you'll think that's justified? Vivian's lips trembled at her question. Richard said coldly, Claire, there's trouble in the family. We present a united front. If you report this now, you'll only make us a laughingstock to outsiders. Claire looked at him. Who is the outsider? Ethan? The bar association? The police? Or those people you cheated? Richard's face turned ashen. How can you talk to me like that? Claire's voice went cold. From now on, I will speak only according to the law. If any of you are involved in taking seals, stamping, lending money, or hiding anything, I will state it truthfully. Vivian felt like she was meeting her daughter for the first time. She stared at Claire, her eyes shifting from panic to resentment. You'd sue your own mother for Ethan? Claire shook her head. Not for him. For myself. She followed the police officer into the interrogation room. When the questioning ended, the sky had already grown dark. Claire stepped out of the police station, and her phone buzzed. It was Adrian. Ms. Claire, Sue Risk Control has found some new developments while investigating how Kevin's information was distributed. Is this a good time to talk? Claire answered the call. Go ahead. Adrian's voice was calm. Kevin admitted during questioning that he not only posted the M&A materials to his Moments, but also forwarded the original images directly to a WeChat contact named Vincent. Claire felt her heart sink. Who is Vincent? Vincent, according to what we found, within 2 hours of receiving the original map, he bought a large amount of stock in companies related to the merger target. The next day, he added more purchases through 2 relatives' accounts. Claire closed her eyes. Did Kevin take the money? He did. Vincent transferred him 100,000 yuan, the note-reading consulting fee. Claire clenched her phone in her hand. The nature of this has completely changed. Adrian said, yes, a leak in Moments is already serious. But if the original images are forwarded separately to a third party and involve the transfer of benefits, it could escalate from a professional disciplinary issue to a criminal case. Claire stood at the police station doorway. The streetlight shone down, stretching her shadow long. Anything else? Adrian paused for a moment. Yes. While checking the background of Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Limited, we found that you are the legal representative and hold 90% of the shares. Claire came to an abrupt halt. What? Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited was registered this June. Its business scope includes legal consulting, corporate management, and investment and financing information consulting. You have another company under your name. Weren't you aware of it? Claire's head buzzed. I never knew. She immediately opened her phone and logged into the government portal to check the corporate registration information. A few seconds later, the page popped up. Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited. The legal representative, Claire, established this June. Shareholder information. Claire holds 90%, Kevin holds 10%. Claire stared at the screen, her breath tightening. She had never known there was another company registered under her name. She immediately dialed Vivian's number. This time, Vivian picked up. Mom, what is Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company Limited? Vivian's voice was thin. It's the company Kevin said he set up for you. Open a company in my name. Use my ID card. They have a copy of your ID at home. Kevin said that since the firm will be controlling you and you'll be constrained, he'd set up a company for you as a backup. He said you'd definitely agree. Claire could hardly breathe. I'd definitely agree. So you just take my ID, my personal seal, my name, set up a company, borrow money, sign documents. Vivian cried. We're family. What's wrong with family using your name for a bit? Claire looked at the phone screen and suddenly smiled. She smiled, and then the tears began to fall. Mom, do you know what this is called? It's called registering under someone else's name. It's called forgery. It's called a crime. Vivian was stunned by her words. It's not that serious, is it? Claire took a deep breath. I just received a text message. Someone used my private seal to sign a 30 million loan contract. Qingyao Company also issued a legal opinion letter in my name. You took my profession, my credit, my legal identity, and used them all to pave the way for Kevin. Vivian was still crying. Mom didn't know it would come to this. I just wanted to help Kevin. Claire suddenly didn't want to argue anymore, because she realized that what separated her and Vivian wasn't a misunderstanding. It was that their understanding of the word bottom line was completely different. In Vivian's eyes, everything about Claire belonged to the family. Her career was the family's prestige. Her money was the family's money. Her marriage was a bargaining chip for the family. Even her name could be used to pave the way for Kevin. Claire hung up the phone. She was about to hail a car where her phone buzzed again. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Lawyer Claire, we're friends of Mr. Vincent. The money your brother owes needs to be paid by someone. If we don't see the money by midnight tonight, we'll wait outside your home." Claire looked at that message and suddenly felt a chill rise from the soles of her feet. She hailed a cab and rushed back to the Shun residence. A few people were standing at the entrance to the complex. They hadn't hung banners or made a scene. They were just leaning against the flower beds, smoking, and staring darkly at everyone who came and went. Seeing Claire get out of the car, the crew cut man in charge immediately put out his cigarette. "Lawyer Claire, you're finally back." Vivian followed behind. The moment she saw those people, she was so frightened she hid behind Richard. Richard forced himself to keep up appearances. "What are you doing? This is a society governed by law." The crew cut man laughed. "We're not breaking the law. Debts must be repaid. It's only right." Claire took out her phone and started recording. "I've already filed a report. If you continue to threaten, harass, or block the door, I'll call the police again." The crew cut man saw her move, and his expression darkened. "Lawyer Claire, don't try to scare people with the police. Your seal is on the contract, your signature is on it, and there's a copy of your property's title. Your brother took the money. Your mother was there too. Now you want to claim forgery and wriggle out." Claire's gaze fell on Vivian. Vivian's eyes darted away. Claire's voice turned cold and hard. "Were you there?" Vivian hurriedly waved her hand. "I didn't. I only went with Kevin. They asked me to sign a witness statement. I didn't sign." The buzz-cut man scoffed. "Aunt Vivian, that's not a very honest thing to say. Back then, you said Lawyer Claire was your daughter. If something happened, she'd surely take responsibility." Vivian's face went completely pale. Claire felt as if her chest had been plunged with a knife. She looked at Vivian. "You said this before?" Vivian explained through tears. "I was just trying to put their minds at ease. Kevin said it was just the final step. How was I to know they'd really come after the debt?" Claire suddenly didn't want to listen anymore. She dialed the police and explained the situation in front of everyone. The buzz-cut man's expression changed. "Fine. Lawyer Claire, if you want to play hard, we'll play with you. But you better think it through. Vincent is missing. The money was taken by your brother, and the seal is yours. If we can't recover the money, we'll have to go through legal channels. When that happens, nobody will be able to live in that house of yours." After he finished speaking, he led his men toward the roadside. Before getting into the car, he glanced back once more. "Oh, and by the way, your brother doesn't owe money to just our family." Vivian's legs went weak, and she sank down to the floor. Richard was stunned as well. Claire clutched her phone, a chill running down her spine. Not just one firm. Those 4 words are like a black door thrown wide open. She had no idea what else lay beyond it. Back home, Vivian completely fell apart. She sat in the living room, crying without stop. "I really didn't know it would turn out like this. I just wanted to help Kevin. He's your brother." Claire set her bag on the table, her voice eerily calm. "From now on, tell me everything related to lending money to Kevin, guaranteeing for him, stamping documents or signing, everything." Vivian's sobs halted. Richard frowned. "What kind of attitude is that?" Claire looked at him. "You too. Tell me everything you know." Richard's face darkened. "I don't know." Claire tapped her phone and played back what the creditor had just said. Vivian's line, "If anything happens, she'll definitely take the blame," was crystal clear. Richard's expression finally changed. "Claire saw. I've already recorded it. If you don't speak up now and it comes out later, I won't explain it for anyone." Vivian wiped her tears. "There's one more payment." Claire felt the weight settle on her chest. "How much?" Vivian couldn't bring herself to look at her. 800,000. Kevin said it was a deposit for the studio. Claire asked, "In whose name?" Vivian's voice faltered. "Yours." Claire closed her eyes. "And what else?" Vivian cried even harder. "I really don't know." Richard shouted irritably. "What were you doing earlier? Didn't you say just once?" Vivian snapped back. "You blame me now? When Kevin came to you for money, didn't you also give him a photocopy of your ID?" The living room fell silent in an instant. Claire slowly turned her head and looked at Richard. "A photocopy of my ID?" Richard's face darkened. "That's for him to use to set up the company." Claire gave a small laugh. "Use my identity to set up a company?" Richard said nothing. Claire picked up her laptop logged into the government affairs platform, and requested the company's registration records. She took screenshots of every page and saved them along with the recordings and text messages. Then she called the Bar Association's investigation team. "Hello, I'm Claire. I need to add an important clarification. Someone, without my consent, has impersonated me to register a company and has been issuing legal documents externally in that company's name." Vivian lunged forward and snatched her phone. "Are you out of your mind? You're going to get Kevin killed." Claire sidestepped. The person on the other end of the line told her to submit the documents tomorrow morning. Claire agreed and hung up. Vivian pointed at her, shaking with anger. "Are you still a member of the Shin family or not?" Claire looked at her. "From the moment you used my name to borrow money, I ceased to be one of you," Richard said angrily. "Claire, don't make an absolute statement." "Claire, shut her laptop. I'll move out tomorrow. This apartment is temporarily under preservation. I won't continue living with you. For all subsequent debts, investigations, and lawsuits, I'll handle them according to the evidence." Vivian's expression suddenly became flustered. "What about your father and me?" Claire looked at her. "You still have Kevin, don't you?" Vivian was so choked up she couldn't speak. At that moment, the doorbell suddenly rang. Everyone in the living room froze. Richard walked over and opened the door. Two uniformed staff members stood outside, along with a police officer. One of them showed his ID. "Is Miss Claire here?" Claire walked over. "I am." The other person handed her a document. "We are staff from the Market Supervision Department. We received a tip that Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company Limited is suspected of registering under false pretenses and illegally providing legal services. Please come tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to cooperate with the investigation." Claire took the document. Before she could speak, the staff member looked toward the room again. "Also, Kevin is one of the company's registered shareholders and needs to cooperate." Vivian's face went frighteningly pale. The staff member continued. "Preliminary checks show the company issued several legal opinion documents, one of which involved a financing project controlled by Vincent." Claire's heart dropped sharply. "How much was the financing project for?" The staff member glanced at her. "According to the registration documents, the investors' funds involved are no less than 80 million. The living room fell instantly silent. Vivian's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor. Chapter 07. When Vivian woke up, she was already lying in the hospital emergency observation room. Richard sat beside her, his complexion ashen. Claire was not at the bedside. She stood at the end of the corridor, taking photos, page by page, of the documents the Market Supervision Department had sent. She was not worried about Vivian. It's just that up to this moment, she no longer dared treat anything as family doesn't understand and brush it off. 80 million. The number pressed against her chest, making even her breathing cautious. If Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited had really been used to endorse Vincent's financing project, then what she faced would be more than disciplinary action from the Bar Association, client complaints, and debt disputes. She could very well be dragged into an illegal financing scam. Even if she had never participated, as long as her name, private seal, or personal information appeared on the documents, she would have to pull herself out of the mud piece by piece. The phone rang. It was Adrian. Claire picked up. "Mr. Adrian." Adrian spoke quickly. "Miss Claire, Mr. Ethan asked me to inform you. Vincent has been taken into custody. He admitted to endorsing Qingyao Legal Consulting Services outwardly, but he claims Kevin was only an intermediary." Claire asked, "Did he mention me?" Adrian was silent for a second. Claire felt a chill in her chest. "Speak," Adrian said. "He said the one who actually provided the legal advice was you." Claire closed her eyes. She wasn't surprised. A man like Vincent would always shove the blame onto someone more valuable when things went wrong. One Kevin wasn't enough to take the fall. A top lawyer like Claire, now that would do. Adrian continued. He has several stamped documents and a recording. Claire's voice tightened. "What recording?" "In the recording, Kevin says, 'My sister is a star lawyer at Taiha. She handled Hongsheng Group's cases. If she signs off, nothing will go wrong.'" Claire tightened her grip on her phone. "I didn't say that." Adrian said, "We know, but the investigators need evidence." Claire took a deep breath. "I'll submit all the evidence showing I was unaware." Adrian paused. "Mr. Ethan also asked me to remind you, don't expect the Shun family to volunteer the truth, especially your mother." Claire turned her head instinctively. Vivian lay on the hospital bed, her face pale, tears still at the corner of her eyes. Richard was quietly comforting her. If that scene had happened before, Claire would have softened. But now, she only felt a chill creeping up her spine. She asked, "Did he find out something?" Adrian didn't answer directly. "Half an hour ago, the police obtained the elevator footage from your residential complex. On the afternoon of May 17th, you were out of town attending a trial. Your mother left the complex with Kevin. Kevin was carrying a black document bag." Claire's breath caught. May 17th, the day before the date on that legal opinion letter. Adrian continued, "That same night, your mother received a transfer of $50,000 from Vincent. The note said tea service fee." Claire's vision went dark. She had to brace herself against the wall to stay upright. She remembered Vivian earlier at the police station, crying and saying she didn't understand anything. She remembered Vivian saying she was only holding on to the seal for a moment. She remembered Vivian shouting again and again that it was all for this family, for Kevin. So, not understanding also meant taking money. So for the family, also carried personal gain. Adrian said, "Mr. Ethan suggests you immediately inform the police about this transfer. If your mother keeps concealing it, she will likely drag you in even deeper." Claire's voice was hoarse. "I understand." After the call ended, she stood there for a long time. People came and went in the emergency corridor. Someone was crying, someone calling for a doctor, someone supporting an elderly person as they passed by her. Claire suddenly felt as if she were standing on the bank of a very long river. On the far shore was the home she had once fought so hard to protect. The water had risen, swallowing Ethan, swallowing her career, swallowing the last sliver of self-deception. She finally turned and walked back to the ward. When Vivian saw her return, she immediately reached out. "Claire, Mom was terrified. Tell me quickly, that 80 million, it's nothing to do with us, right?" Claire stood at the foot of the bed, looking at her. "On May 17th, who did you and Kevin take my private seal out to sea?" Vivian's sobs stopped abruptly. Richard frowned. "Your mother just woke up. Why are you asking this again?" Claire didn't look at him. She simply stared at Vivian. "Vincent transferred 50,000 to you. No team money." Vivian's expression changed in an instant. Richard was also stunned. 50,000 for what?" Vivian opened her mouth. "That is—" Claire finished for her. "That's the money you got for selling my name?" Vivian recoiled as if struck, jerking upright. "How can you say that about me? I'm your mother." Claire's eyes were red. "So what I want to know even more is, how could you do this?" Vivian cried out. "I had no choice at the time either. Kevin said that if this went through, he could secure the investment. He wouldn't have to rely on you anymore. Vincent said there'd be a little compensation. I thought, why not take it if it's free? How was I supposed to know it'd involve 80 million? Claire felt it was utterly absurd. "You don't know that 80 million and you can take my seal? You don't know it's illegal and you can accept the money? You don't know the consequences and you can push me out?" Tears streamed down Vivian's face as she was questioned. "Mom was wrong. Mom really was wrong. But you can't abandon me." Claire looked at her, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. "You were wrong, not because you hurt me. You were wrong because you realized things were getting out of control." Vivian's expression froze. Richard said angrily, "Claire, that's enough. She's your mother." Claire turned her head slowly. "Dad, do you know about this 50,000? Richard's expression went stiff. Claire watched his reaction, and a last warm place in her heart went cold. "You knew too." Richard forced himself to speak. "I only know Vincent gave some money. I don't know what they did with your seal." Claire nodded. "So you all knew there was money. None of you knew the consequences." She took out her phone and dialed the police station. Vivian lunged forward like a madwoman to snatch it. "What are you doing?" Claire stepped back, filing an additional report. Vivian shook her head, crying. "No, Mom is begging you. You can't send Mom to prison too." Claire's tears fell. "I didn't send anyone to prison. I only told the truth about what you did." The call connected. In front of Vivian and Richard, she explained everything about May 17th, the private seal, Vincent's transfers, and the 50,000 yuan fee. Vivian lay sprawled on the hospital bed, as if her soul had been drained away. Richard pointed at her, so furious his hand was shaking. "You're truly insane." Claire hung up the phone and looked at him. "Maybe. I should have gone mad a long time ago." At that moment, the ward door was pushed open. 2 policemen came in. One of them looked at Vivian. "Ms. Vivian, there are some matters we need you to cooperate with in our investigation." Vivian was completely panic-stricken. "No, I'm not going. I'm not well." The police spoke calmly. "We can wait for a doctor to confirm your condition. But please cooperate and explain first." Vivian looked at Claire, her eyes filled with nothing but despair and hatred. Claire, you'll get what you deserve. Claire stood where she was, neither fleeing nor crying. She only suddenly remembered that day when Vivian sat on the seventh-floor windowsill, using death and family ties to threaten everyone in the same way. Back then, she had chosen to let Ethan sign. Today, she finally refused to let someone else pay the price for this family anymore. After the officer took Vivian away, Richard slapped her. Claire didn't dodge. The blow landed on her face, burning with pain. Everyone in the corridor looked over. Richard's eyes were bloodshot as he cursed. Beast, you even hurt your mother. Claire tilted her head, and after a long while finally looked up. Dad, this is the first time you've hit me. It will also be the last. Richard was stunned for a moment. Claire picked up her bag and turned to leave. Richard's furious voice came from behind. If you leave, don't come back. Claire didn't look back. I never planned to come back anyway. When she walked out of the hospital, the sky was just beginning to take on a gray-white tint. The phone vibrated. The Bar Association investigation team sent a notice. Because the new lead involves registering a company using a stolen identity and illegal financing endorsements, Claire is requested to undergo a joint inquiry today at 2 p.m. Immediately after, Adrian sent another message. Vincent submitted some so-called supplemental evidence. He claims that Ethan was also aware of the establishment of Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Limited. Claire's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. The next second, a news alert popped up. Info leak at Hongcheng Group escalates. Mysterious consultant Ethan implicated in suspicions of illegal financing endorsements. Claire stared at the headline, feeling nailed to the hospital entrance. Ethan was implicated in a scandal of illegal financing endorsements. Those few words made her more panicked than when she herself was under investigation. She knew Ethan wouldn't do something like that, but she also knew that Kevin and Vincent, desperate to get free, were capable of anything. She immediately called Ethan. It rang for a long time. No one answered. She dialed Adrian again. Mr. Adrian, where is Ethan? Adrian's voice was very calm. Mr. Ethan is preparing the materials. The joint inquiry starts at 2 this afternoon. He will be there. Claire's breath caught. What does he need me to do? Adrian paused. Mr. Ethan said you just need to state the facts truthfully. He will handle the matters on his side himself. Claire held the phone, her knuckles white. It's not that I'm worried he can't handle it. It's just. She paused, her voice sinking. I owe him. Adrian didn't reply immediately. After a few seconds, he said, Miss Claire, Mr. Ethan asked me to pass on a message to you. Claire looked up. What did he say? Adrian said, he said what you owe isn't to him. It's to yourself. Getting back what you owe yourself is more important than anything. The call ended. Claire stood at the hospital entrance, watching the light brightening slowly on the horizon. She suddenly remembered the sentence Ethan had said yesterday at Sue Consulting Group. Take responsibility. Stop treating crying and regret as solutions. She took a deep breath and flagged down a cab. Take me to the Bar Association. At 2 in the afternoon, the joint inquiry room was full of people. The Bar Association, the market regulators, the police, Hongcheng Group's legal team, and the Sue family's risk control unit were all present. When Claire walked in, she saw Ethan sitting at the far end of the long table. He was wearing a dark suit, with a stack of documents in front of him. He didn't look at her, but for some reason, the tautness that had ridden Claire all the way there slackened a little. When the inquiry began, the staff first played a recording. The voice on the recording was Kevin's. Don't worry, my sister is a top lawyer at Taihe Law Firm. She handled all of Hongcheng Group's cases. My brother-in-law also has connections. You know Sue Consulting Group, right? They're all our people. Vincent's voice sounded next. Ethan really knows? Kevin chuckled. Would he dare not to? Back then he couldn't even sit at our family's table. One word from my sister, and he had to do it. When the recording finished, the interrogation room fell into a terrifying hush. Claire's face drained of color little by little. She wasn't afraid of being implicated. For the first time, as an outsider, she heard how Kevin talked about Ethan. That contempt and sense of entitlement cut like a knife, exposing the foolishness of her past 3 years for everyone to see. The staff looked at Claire. Lawyer Claire, were you aware of the contents mentioned in the recording? Claire looked up. I was not aware. I was not aware of the registration of Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Limited. I was not aware of documents issued using my private seal. I was not aware of Kevin making promises to outsiders in my name or Ethan's name. She paused for a moment and looked at Ethan. Ethan could not possibly have known. Everyone in the interrogation room looked at her. Ethan finally lifted his eyes and glanced at her. In that moment, Claire suddenly felt that she had, at last, gotten a long overdue line exactly right. Chapter 08. When Vincent was brought in, he had handcuffs on his wrists. He saw Ethan and his eyes flickered for a moment. The staff asked him to explain the relationship between Xingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Limited and the Sue Consulting Group. Vincent said immediately. Kevin said Ethan would help. He said Sue Consulting Group could endorse the project. I thought they were family, so I believed him. Ethan finally looked up. What was the basis for your belief? Vincent swallowed. Kevin said so. Ethan looked at the staff. What I'm asking is, what evidence do you have to prove that I knew? Sweat beaded on Vincent's forehead. What more do you need than a family's verbal promise? Ethan said coldly, a verbal promise isn't evidence. If you can't produce any written materials, emails, chat records, contracts, or payment receipts proving I have ties to Qingyao Company, are you relying solely on Kevin's word? Vincent's expression changed. Ethan turned to the staff member and pushed the documents forward. I'm submitting 3 pieces of evidence. First, Sue Consulting Group never had any business dealings with Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited. These are contract ledgers and client lists from the past 3 years. Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited is not listed among them. Second, since Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited was registered, Sue Group's legal department system contains no contracts, emails, approvals, or payment records related to that company. This is the system log. Third, when Sue's risk control team discovered that Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Limited was fraudulently using Claire's professional identity, they immediately reported the lead to the regulatory authorities. These are the internal risk records, with timestamps earlier than Vincent's so-called expose. He then took out another printed document. So, it isn't that Sue Group, after being investigated, tried to distance itself. Rather, Sue Group proactively discovered the anomaly and reported it. The interrogation room fell silent for a few seconds. Vincent's expression completely changed. The staff leafed through the files and pulled the system logs of the Sue Consulting Group. Every item matched what Ethan had said. Vincent, you claim Ethan was aware, but there is currently no direct evidence to support your assertion. Vincent's eyes finally showed panic. But Kevin said. The staff member cut him off. Kevin's statement cannot be used as proof that Ethan was aware. You need to provide other evidence. Vincent couldn't speak. Ethan put the documents away, his tone calm. Vincent, you used Kevin to obtain information about Hongsheng Group's merger and acquisition deal and bought related stock for profit. You used Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Limited as a cover to raise funds, involving $80 million. Now troubles come up, and you want to pin the responsibility on me. Vincent's face went chalk white. I didn't. Ethan looked at him. If you have any, the investigation will make it clear. The inquiry continued. Claire also submitted her materials, evidence of her unawareness, records of trials held out of town, a statement about the lost private seal, and a recording of Vivian admitting she took the seal. When the inquiry concluded, Vincent was taken away. Ethan stood up and walked out. Claire followed behind. Just as they stepped out of the interrogation room, Richard came rushing down the other end of the corridor. He saw Ethan. His eyes were red. Ethan, are you satisfied now? Vivian has been taken away, Kevin is detained, and Claire is finished. Do you have to drive the Shin family to death before you'll be satisfied? Ethan stopped. He looked at Richard. Mr. Richard, the Shun family hasn't reached their end yet. It's just finally time to collect the debt. Richard's face went ashen. Claire is still your ex-wife. After all, are you really going to be this ruthless? Ethan said calmly. So I didn't let her be crushed by a blame she didn't deserve. This is already the last bit of dignity I'm giving her. Richard was about to curse again. Claire suddenly stepped in front of him. Dad, that's enough. Richard glared at her. You're still defending him? Claire looked at him, her voice soft but steady. I'm not defending him. I'm finally done helping you lie. Richard froze. In the corridor, staff from the Bar Association, the market regulator, and the police all turned to look. Claire continued, Mom took Vincent's money, and you didn't tell me. Kevin used my name to start a company, and you didn't tell me. They took my seal to sign the loan contract, and you didn't tell me. Every time, you say we're a family. Every time, you make me take the blame, take responsibility, clean up the mess. But did any of you ever think that I'm your child too? Richard's lips twitched. He couldn't find the words. At that moment, a staff member came out of the inquiry room. Mr. Richard, we also need your cooperation in investigating your contact with the media to release false information. Richard's face finally went completely pale. 3 days later, the first batch of investigation findings came out. Su Consulting Group has no business relationship with Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Ltd. Ethan was not involved in the registration, financing endorsements, or the Vincent project operations of Qingyao Legal Consulting Services Company, Ltd. In the Hongchang Group information leak case, the risk control materials submitted by the Su Group and Hongqing Group were recognized as valid evidence. The news item that dragged Ethan into the mess was taken down by the platform. The media account that posted the expose issued a public apology. Richard also received materials for a defamation lawsuit. But the real collapse of the Shun family had only just begun. Kevin was subject to compulsory measures by law on suspicion of illegally obtaining and disseminating commercial secrets, and for participating in the fabrication of legal opinion documents and registering companies under assumed identities. Vincent was investigated for illegally absorbing funds, trading on non-public information, and forging project endorsements. Vivian was repeatedly summoned for assisting in transferring the company's seal, receiving transfers from Vincent, and participating in the false endorsement process. Although Richard did not directly affix the stamp, he provided copies of ID cards, contacted the media to spread rumors, and concealed certain facts, and was also drawn into investigations and civil claims. Claire sat in the Bar Association meeting room, having listened to the interim sanctions proposed against her. The investigator's tone was stern. Lawyer Claire, regarding the removal and improper custody of Hongqing Group's project materials, you have clearly violated professional discipline. Considering the leak was not perpetrated by you voluntarily, and that you later cooperated with the investigation and submitted key evidence, the Bar Association intends to suspend your practice for 1 year, issue a public reprimand, and order you to attend professional ethics training. 1 year. If this had been before, Claire would have collapsed upon hearing the result. But now, she merely closed her eyes. I accept. The investigator glanced at her. Do you have any defense or comments? Claire shook her head. No, I did make a mistake. I take responsibility for this outcome. She stood up and walked out of the conference room. Her phone vibrated. It was a call from Vivian. Claire hesitated for a moment, then answered. On the other end of the line, Vivian's voice was heavily hoarse. Claire, Mom knows she was wrong. Can you come and see me? Claire stood at the foot of the steps, watching people pass by. She didn't speak immediately. Vivian cried. Kevin's lawyer says things look bad. You can't just ignore your brother. Claire felt very calm. So calm that she barely recognized herself. I'll hire a reputable criminal lawyer for him. The legal fees will come from my personal account. Besides that, I won't lie for him, I won't bribe anyone to bury the case, and I won't take on debts that aren't mine. Vivian's crying paused. How did you become like this? Claire said, I just became someone with standards again. Vivian suddenly grew agitated. What about me? I'm your mother. I'm under investigation too. Can't you just say that the $50,000 was you asking me to take it? Claire held her phone, her gaze growing colder by the second. Mom, this is the last time you asked me that. Vivian froze. Claire continued. If you ask me to lie for you again, I'll submit the recording of this call as well. Vivian's breathing immediately went erratic. Claire, are you really going to be that ruthless? Claire closed her eyes. I'm not ruthless. I just won't sink on behalf of anyone anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. In the end, Vivian hung up crying. In the afternoon, Claire returned to that apartment. A court security notice was posted on the door. The place was empty. Vivian and Richard had temporarily moved in with relatives. The living room that once bustled so much it made Ethan short of breath was now nothing but a mess strewn across the floor. Claire packed her things out piece by piece. She didn't take the expensive bags. She didn't take the trinkets relatives had given her. She only took her IDs, a few professional books, her old laptop, and that photograph she had folded up. As she reached the door, she paused, turned back, and looked once more. This apartment was bought by Ethan. It was registered in her name. She had once thought it was the security within her marriage. But now she understood that security was never a house. It was a person willing to give you their best, and you failed to cherish it. She closed the door behind her and left the keys in a mailbox. The next day, she reached out to Daniel herself. Lawyer Daniel, I want to put this apartment on the market. Daniel didn't seem surprised. Miss Claire, the property is currently under preservation. You need to resolve the related debts and restrictions first. Claire said, I know. The proceeds from the sale will first go to repay the funds Ethan advanced on behalf of the Shun family, the damages for reputational infringement, and the reasonable losses acknowledged by Hongshun Group and the Su Group. Whatever remains, if anything, I'll handle. Daniel was silent for a moment. This is the property Mr. Ethan gave you in the divorce agreement. Claire said softly, I no longer deserve to take it with a clear conscience. Daniel Sewell, I will inform Mr. Ethan. That night, Claire received the first message from Ethan. It was only one sentence. Don't make decisions out of guilt. Claire stared at it for a long time. She replied, not guilt. It's that I've finally decided to take responsibility for myself this once. This time, Ethan did not reply. But Claire felt that she had finally said a sentence that had been late for a long time. A few days later, Kevin's lawyer came to see her. The lawyer said Kevin wanted to see her. Claire went. Through the glass, Kevin looked so haggard he was barely recognizable as the brash younger brother he used to be. The moment he saw Claire, tears started falling. Sis, I was wrong. Help me. I really don't want to go to jail. Claire sat down. What do you want to say? Kevin said through tears. Help me. Go beg Ethan. If he simply says he won't pursue it, Hongshun Group might relent. Claire looked at him quietly for a few seconds. Kevin, do you still think that if someone else backs down, you're automatically in the right? Kevin froze. Claire stood up. I've already hired a lawyer. He will help you within the bounds of the law. This is the last thing I can give you. Kevin banged on the glass and shouted at her. Sis, you can't just leave me. Claire didn't look back. When she walked out of the prison, the sunlight was blinding. She raised a hand to shield her eyes. In a daze, she suddenly remembered the rainy night Ethan left the Shun family. That day he walked into the elevator alone and didn't look back. So the ones who have truly made up their minds to leave, their backs are always this quiet. She took out her phone and sent a message to Daniel. About the house, please handle it as soon as possible. I want to pay back everything I owe. Daniel replied quickly. Okay, Miss Claire. I will follow up. Claire put away her phone and walked toward the bus stop. The rain had already stopped. Puddles remained on the ground, reflecting the color of the sky. She suddenly felt that she could finally begin to move forward. Chapter 09. After the property was disposed of, Claire received a notice from Daniel. Ms. Claire, after deducting the related debts, compensation, and litigation expenses, there is a remaining balance. Claire stared at that message, silent for a long time. She replied, use the balance to repay the other amounts Ethan advanced for the Shun family that were not included in the lawsuit. Daniel called back quickly. Ms. Claire, Mr. Ethan said, this is the property in the divorce settlement for you. Keep it yourself. Claire's voice was very soft. I no longer deserve to take it with a clear conscience. Daniel paused for a moment. I'll inform Mr. Ethan. That night, Daniel called again. Ms. Claire, Mr. Ethan says you don't need to make your decision out of guilt. Claire held the phone. It's not guilt. It's that I finally want to take responsibility for myself. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Daniel Sewell, Mr. Ethan asked me to tell you he accepts your decision, but he wants you to understand that repaying the debt is for yourself, not for him. Claire closed her eyes. I know. And Mr. Ethan said, from now on, there is no debt relationship between you. A slight pang tightened Claire's chest. No debt relationship. Those words carried more weight than any legal document. Thank him for me. Daniel Sewell. Mr. Ethan also said one more thing. Claire looked up. What? Daniel's voice was very calm. He said, may you no longer mistake tolerance for love. Claire's eyes suddenly warmed. She said nothing. Daniel Sewell. Ms. Claire, Mr. Ethan asked me to pass on his final words. He said that from today on, there is no need for any future between you. The call ended. Claire sat in the empty living room, staring at the phone screen. She remembered what Ethan had said at Sue Consulting Group. There was, but you spent it all. She remembered the photograph she had folded up, the one where Ethan stood at the very edge, half his shoulder almost cut off by the frame. She remembered the warm water he had poured for her. She always took it without thinking, sometimes not even saying thank you. She remembered that during the 3 years he spent with the Shun family, he never once sat at the dining table. She remembered Vivian calling him a pauper. He only bowed his head and sipped his tea. She remembered Kevin hitting someone. He took care of the aftermath. She remembered Vivian perched on the windowsill, and Claire telling him to sign first. She remembered all the injuries she thought he didn't care about. So he had remembered everything. So he had only been waiting for a day of reckoning. A few days later, Claire moved out of the Shun residence. She took only her papers, a few professional books, an old laptop, and that folded photograph. She didn't go anywhere else. She rented a small apartment and began to put her life back together. The Bar Association's disciplinary notice officially arrived. Suspended from practice for 1 year. Public reprimand. Ordered to attend professional ethics training. Claire looked at the paper and did not cry. She simply put it into the folder, then continued tidying up. She now works as a compliance assistant at a mid-sized manufacturing company. The pay isn't high, and no one calls her senior counsel. But she actually feels secure. Because here, every document must be approved. Every outgoing communication, leave a record. Every verbal instruction, she confirms with an email. Her colleagues teased her for being overly cautious. She only smiled. She would not let herself fall into the same pit again. A week later, Emily came to see her. Emily had already left Taiha Law Firm and gone to another firm. She brought a cup of coffee. Lawyer Claire, I still prefer to call you that. Claire took the coffee. Thank you. Emily sat down and spoke softly. The Taiha Law Firm is in chaos. Over at Victor's side, things aren't looking good. Several partners have left. Claire lowered her eyes. That's their business. Emily hesitated. Lawyer Claire, have you really cut ties with your family? Claire was silent for a moment. It's not cut off. It's about establishing boundaries. If they fall ill and need lawful support, I will take care of it. If they want me to take the blame, pay their debts, or lie, I will no longer be involved. Emily let out a soft sigh. That's fine. She stood up to leave, then turned back and said one more thing. Lawyer Claire, I've actually been meaning to tell you. You were really impressive back when you were at Tile Law Firm, but I think now you're even more admirable than before. Claire watched her go and suddenly felt a warmth in her eyes. She lowered her head and continued sorting the client's files. A month later, Claire received a message from Ethan. It was the last one, forwarded by Daniel. Mr. Ethan said the remaining proceeds from the property disposal have been received. He will, as you requested, apply them to settle the related debts. From today on, there are no outstanding matters between you. Claire stared at that line of text, her finger hovering over the screen. She thought for a long time, then replied with a single sentence. Ethan, I've paid back everything I owed. From now on, I'll live well. After she sent the message, she didn't wait for a reply. She knew there would be none, because between him and her, there truly did not need to be an afterwards. A few days later, while sorting through old things, Claire came across that photograph. On the night of the victory banquet, she stood in front of Taiha Law Firm's backdrop, smiling with proud triumph. Ethan stood in the corner, not taking a seat, just watching her quietly. She took the photo up and looked at it for a long time. In the end, she cut off Ethan's half and placed it by itself in an envelope. She didn't throw it away, nor did she fold it again. She simply put it away, placed it in the deepest part of the drawer. Some things don't need to be forgotten, but they also don't need to be taken out and looked at again. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sunlight was beautiful. She suddenly remembered that the day Ethan left the Shin residence had the same sunlight. He stepped into the elevator and didn't look back. She chased him to the door and asked if there was any chance left. He said no. 2 words, like a door slammed shut for good. But now, she finally understood. That door hadn't been closed by him. She herself had little by little welded it shut. 6 months later, the Hongsheng Group acquisition deal was back on track, and the Su Consulting Group's Legal Coordination Center, as the core risk control team, assisted in completing the transaction closing. At the press conference, Harrison personally mentioned Ethan. Mr. Ethan has been an important advisor to Hongsheng Group for many years. The fact that this crisis was contained in time owes everything to the professional judgment of the Su Group team. The camera swept across the audience. Ethan sat in the front row, expression calm. He didn't pause even a second because of the applause. When the press conference ended, he stood up and left. Harrison shook his hand in the VIP lounge. Mr. Ethan, everything from the past has been taken care of, right? Ethan looked at the plane outside the floor-to-ceiling window. It's all been taken care of. Harrison smiled. That's good. People need to look forward. Ethan said nothing. The boarding announcement sounded. He picked up his coat and walked toward the boarding gate. On his phone, the last case closure notice concerning the Shun family had been archived. Vivian could no longer use the window ledge to threaten anyone. Kevin had finally paid the price for his greed. Richard finally understood that not every lie can be covered up by saying we're family. And Claire, at last, learned to take responsibility. Ethan walked into the sunlight. This time, there was no rain outside, nor did anyone ask him to endure it anymore. He did not look back. Chapter 10. 1 year later. Claire had her license to practice law reinstated. She didn't go back to the big law firm, nor did she continue chasing the so-called title of top lawyer. She and Emily opened a small compliance studio together. The first rule was written on the wall. All client materials must not be taken out of the office. Any documents sent out must be double-checked by 2 people. Any referrals from friends and family must be recorded in writing. Emily looked at the line and smiled at herself for being so serious. Claire smiled too. After falling once, you should know where not to step empty again. On the day of the opening, she received a bouquet. No signature. There was only one sentence on the card. May you never mistake forbearance for love again. Claire stared at it for a long time. She wasn't sure if Ethan had sent them. Maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. But she didn't ask. She set the flowers on the windowsill and then went back to sorting client files. The sunlight outside was bright. She finally no longer stood in anyone's shadow. He only lost a man who loved him.